What happens when a routine hunting trip takes a turn into uncharted territory? Mark, a devoted family man, finds himself alone with Chloe, his wife's bubbly colleague, and the tension between them quickly escalates beyond mere friendship. As they navigate the wilderness, both in the woods and within themselves, Mark is forced to confront desires he never knew he had. Will he be able to resist the pull of temptation? Or will this weekend change everything? Stay tuned for a gripping tale of choice, consequence, and the fragility of loyalty. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. My name is Mark, and I always saw myself as a straightforward, grounded man, devoted to my family, my job, and the traditions that gave my life purpose. However, everything changed one unforgettable weekend. It began simply enough. A routine hunting trip with someone I barely knew. A favor for my wife. But what transpired in the woods tested every ounce of my self-control, shattered the limits I believed I would never cross, and forced me to face desires I never thought I had. I'm sharing this not to be judged, but because this story continues to haunt me, and it's far from finished. Every year, the first weekend of November signals the start of deer hunting season, my favorite tradition. It's not just a hobby, but a ritual, a chance to escape the daily grind and reconnect with nature. Typically, my wife, Lisa, joins me at our secluded hunting cabin, a refuge set within 20,000 acres of pristine Missouri forest. Over the years, we've poured our hearts into transforming the land into our little paradise, building trails, creating food plots, and perfecting the cabin. But this year, things were different. A few weeks ago, during dinner, Lisa told me she wouldn't be coming along. She had been selected to attend a prestigious series of educational reform meetings at the state capitol. While I was proud of her achievement, the thought of spending my birthday alone for the hunting opener wasn't exactly thrilling. Normally, I wouldn't have minded, but Lisa had been insistent, especially after my heart scare earlier in the year, that I shouldn't go out there by myself. Her solution? Chloe. Chloe was one of Lisa's colleagues, a young woman I'd met a few times at school events. She was friendly, bubbly, and much younger than I was. Recently divorced, Chloe was navigating life with a certain optimism that seemed to mask the pain I suspected she carried. Lisa had arranged for Chloe to accompany me on her first hunting trip, insisting that it would be good for both of us. I wouldn't be alone, and Chloe would get the chance to learn something new. To say I was skeptical would be an understatement. I had been looking forward to the solitude, the quiet mornings in the blind and evenings by the fire with just my thoughts. Having a companion, especially one who didn't know a rifle from a fishing rod, wasn't part of the plan. Friday evening came and I found myself pulling into Chloe's driveway. Lisa had asked me to honk the horn, something I would usually consider rude, but I went along with it. The front door opened and Chloe emerged, framed by the warm light spilling out of the house. She was carrying enough gear to outfit an army. Her cheerful smile brightened the evening. "Hi, Mark," she called, her voice filled with energy. I got out of the truck to help her with her bags. "That's quite the setup," I said, nodding toward the impressive pile. She laughed. "Lisa told me to come prepared. I might have overdone it." She chatted non-stop during the drive to the cabin, filling the truck with stories about work, her divorce, and random anecdotes about her life. It was a stark contrast to the quiet I had anticipated, but I couldn't say I minded. Her energy was contagious, and despite my initial hesitation, I found myself smiling. We arrived at the cabin around 9 p.m., the moon casting a gentle glow over the clearing. I immediately got to work turning on the power and warming up the place while Chloe settled into the loft. By the time the fire crackled in the stove, the cabin felt warm and inviting. I sank into the living room, flipping on an old war movie in an attempt to relax. But just as I was starting to unwind, Chloe called down from the loft. "Is it okay if I use the shower?" "Sure, go ahead," I answered, barely glancing away from the screen. A few minutes later, I heard the faint creak of the spiral staircase. My attention snapped to Chloe as she walked past, wrapped in nothing but a small towel that barely covered her, riding up as she moved. My eyes lingered longer than they should have before I forced myself to look away. This weekend was going to be interesting. As I sat in the great room trying to focus on the war movie, I couldn't shake the image of Chloe descending the stairs in that tiny towel, her damp hair catching the dim light, her bare shoulders gleaming. It was an image I shouldn't have been holding on to, yet it stayed. I scolded myself, shaking my head to clear my thoughts. Chloe was Lisa's colleague, a friend even, and this trip was about teaching her to hunt. Nothing more. The sound of the shower running reached my ears, along with Chloe's soft humming. It was innocent, cheerful even, but it stirred something inside me that I wasn't proud of. I tried to focus on the movie, leaning forward in my chair as the climactic battle scene unfolded, but my mind wandered. Chloe was just on the other side of the bathroom door, her voice drifting through the thin walls. My chest tightened, and I clenched my fists, trying to ignore the thoughts creeping in. After what felt like an eternity, the water stopped. The humming stopped too, replaced by the faint rustle of a towel and the creak of floorboards as Chloe moved about the bathroom. I kept my eyes fixed on the TV, forcing myself not to imagine what she looked like on the other side of that door. The movie ended, and I grabbed the remote, flipping through the channels in search of a distraction. When Chloe finally emerged, her damp hair wrapped in a second towel, she looked refreshed, her cheeks glowing from the heat of the shower. She smiled at me as she descended the stairs, now dressed in navy blue shorts and a cropped white top that left little to the imagination. The shirt rode up slightly as she moved, revealing a hint of her toned stomach. "All set for tomorrow?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Yep," she said cheerfully, holding up an empty jar of peanut butter. "Just need this for later." I raised an eyebrow, confused, but chose not to ask. She plopped down on the sofa next to me, setting the jar on the coffee table. The faint scent of her shampoo, a mix of something floral and sweet, wafted over. I shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware of the small space between us. "Thanks for letting me tag along this weekend," she said, turning to face me. Her eyes sparkled with genuine warmth. "Lisa really talked up this whole hunting experience, so I'm excited to see what it's all about." "Of course," I replied, forcing a smile. "It's a great spot, quiet, lots of wildlife. You'll enjoy it." She leaned back, tucking her legs beneath her. The movement drew my eyes to the curve of her thighs, and I quickly looked away, cursing myself silently. This was going to be harder than I had thought. For the next hour, we talked about hunting basics. I walked her through the plan for the morning, the gear she'd need, and how to be patient in the blind. She listened closely, nodding and asking thoughtful questions. But every so often her gaze would linger on me, and her lips would curl into a subtle smile that I couldn't quite read. It wasn't flirtatious exactly, but it wasn't purely friendly either. As the fire crackled in the stove, Chloe stretched, reaching her arms over her head. The movement caused her top to ride up further, revealing the faintest line of her lower back. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my focus on the conversation, but my resolve was wearing thin. Eventually she stood up, picking up the peanut butter jar and heading toward the loft. "Well, I'm going to call it a night," she said, pausing at the base of the stairs. "Thanks again, Mark. This weekend's been—" I watched her ascend the spiral staircase, my eyes following her until she disappeared into the loft. The sound of her footsteps gradually faded, leaving me alone once again. I sank back onto the couch and exhaled deeply, the tension in my chest refusing to loosen. I had a growing sense that this weekend was going to turn out far more complicated than I had originally thought. The next morning, I woke to the relentless buzzing of my alarm. It was still dark outside, and the cabin felt colder than I expected. I got out of bed, shivering slightly as my feet touched the hardwood floor. My mind was still foggy from a restless night, with images of Chloe descending the stairs the previous evening, her carefree attitude, her bright smile, still lingering longer than they should have. Shaking my head, I told myself to concentrate. Today was about hunting and nothing else. I quickly dressed in my usual camouflage hunting clothes over a lightweight thermal base. By the time I left my room, the faint aroma of coffee brewing reached me from the kitchen. Chloe was already up. Or so I thought. I called up to the loft. "Time to get moving," I said, my voice cutting through the stillness of the morning. She groggily responded a moment later. "Okay, give me a minute. I got to work preparing breakfast, bacon and eggs sizzling in the pan." I wasn't much of a cook, but I had perfected a few basic meals over the years. As the smell of the food filled the cabin, I heard Chloe's footsteps on the spiral staircase. When I turned to greet her, my breath caught in my throat. She was descending the stairs, completely unbothered by her state of undress. Her steps were slow and casual, as though it were completely natural. Her damp hair framed her face, and her skin glowed softly in the light filtering through the windows. I quickly looked away, my face turning red. "Good morning," she said, her voice light and carefree as if nothing were unusual. "Morning," I muttered, my focus locked on the bacon. You, might want to put something on." "It's cold outside." She laughed softly, the sound teasing. "Oh, come on, Mark, don't act so shy. It's just skin." I gripped the spatula tightly, unsure how to respond. My pulse quickened as she walked past me to the fridge, grabbing a jar of peanut butter. She leaned slightly over the counter, her back to me, completely unfazed by her lack of clothes. I tried to keep my attention on the stove, but the temptation to look was nearly unbearable. "Seriously, though," I said, trying to steady my voice. "We heading out soon? You'll freeze out there." She turned to me with a playful smile. Fine, I'll get dressed," she said, tossing me a grin over her shoulder. "Don't worry, I'll be ready." I exhaled, realizing I had been holding my breath. Shaking my head, I focused on plating the food. By the time she came back down, she was fully dressed in her hunting gear, as if nothing unusual had just happened. She grabbed her plate and sat down at the table, chatting excitedly about the day ahead. But the tension between us was palpable, at least for me. Every laugh, every smile she gave me seemed to carry an unspoken undercurrent. I couldn't tell if she was testing me or if this was just how she was, carefree and uninhibited. Either way, it was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. After breakfast, we loaded up the ATV with our gear. Chloe climbed onto the seat behind me, wrapping her arms around my waist as I started the engine. The cold morning air nipped at my face, but her warmth against my back was undeniable. She held on tightly as we sped through the woods, the ATV cutting through the darkness. When we reached the hunting spot, I helped her off the ATV and handed her the rifle. "From here we walk," I said, my voice lower than usual. She nodded, her excitement evident. "Lead the way." As we made our way through the woods toward the blind, the silence of the forest seemed to match the quiet between us. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was treading dangerously close to a line I had no business crossing. But the way Chloe would glance at me when she thought I wasn't looking, the subtle curve of her lips when she smiled, it was as if she knew exactly what she was doing. Somehow I knew this hunting trip was about more than just deer. The forest was still as only early morning hours could make it. She followed closely behind me as we approached the blind, her boots crunching softly on the fallen leaves. The sound barely broke the stillness. I looked back a few times to make sure she could keep up, but she was more than capable, her determination clear on her face. I couldn't help but admire how quickly she adapted, though I tried not to let my thoughts wander. When we reached the blind, I stopped and turned to her. "This is it," I said, gesturing to the small structure nestled between the trees. "Nothing fancy, but it works." Chloe nodded, her eyes wide with excitement. "It's perfect." I climbed the short ladder and stepped inside, holding the door open for her. She followed me, her presence filling the small space as she sat down on the bench beside me. The blind was cozy, just enough room for two, with a few small windows looking out onto the clearing ahead. The sun was starting to rise, casting a soft golden light over the trees. It was a sight I had seen countless times, but this morning it felt different. I handed Chloe her rifle, keeping my voice low. "Remember, safety first. Keep the barrel pointed away and don't load it until you're ready to shoot." She nodded, her expression serious. "Got it." I leaned back against the wall, watching as she adjusted her position, her movements deliberate and focused. For a while we sat in silence, our breaths the only sound in the small space. The air between us felt heavy, not just from the anticipation of the hunt, but from something else. I tried to focus on the clearing, scanning for any sign of movement, but my thoughts kept drifting back to Chloe. She shifted beside me, her knee brushing against mine. I glanced at her, but she seemed intent on watching the field. I told myself it was nothing, a simple accident, but the small touch sent a jolt through me. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay focused. After a while, Chloe broke the silence. "It's so peaceful out here," she whispered, her voice soft. I nodded. "That's one of the reasons I love it. Just you, the forest, and the quiet," she smiled, her eyes meeting mine for a brief moment before she looked away. "Thanks for bringing me. I know it wasn't your first choice, but it means a lot." I hesitated, unsure how to respond. "It's not a problem," I said finally. "Everyone deserves to experience this at least once." The minutes stretched on, and the tension in the air seemed to grow with each passing second. I tried to shake it off, focusing on the task at hand. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw movement. I nudged Chloe gently and pointed toward the clearing. "There," I whispered, gesturing to the edge of the trees. She raised her rifle, following my direction. A young buck had stepped into the clearing. Its antlers were small but visible. It moved cautiously, its head bobbing as it sniffed the air. "Wait for it to turn broadside," I instructed, my voice barely audible. "You want a clean shot right behind the shoulder." She nodded, her hands steady as she lined up the shot. Everything seemed to freeze, the forest, the deer, even my breath. Then the rifle clicked. My stomach sank as I realized what had happened. No round in the chamber. I spoke quietly, asking, "Chloe?" She frowned and worked the lever to load the gun, but it was too late. The buck had already dashed away, vanishing into the thicket. Chloe let out a frustrated sigh, lowering the rifle. "I thought it was ready," she said, her voice tinged with disappointment. "It's okay," I replied, trying to sound reassuring. "It happens. You'll get another shot." She leaned back, her head resting against the wall. "I feel so stupid." "You're not," I answered. "Hunting takes practice. You'll get the hang of it." After that, the mood in the blind shifted. The initial excitement faded, replaced by a quiet frustration. Chloe pulled off her jacket, muttering about it being too warm. I tried to stay focused on the clearing, but my thoughts kept returning to her, the way she moved, the way she spoke. It was all becoming harder to ignore. As she sat next to me, peeling off her thermal layers one by one, I realized that the temperature outside wasn't the only thing rising. The air in the blind was getting warmer too. I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep my focus. The morning sun climbed higher and Chloe had shed her jacket. Now she sat beside me in just her undershirt and camouflage pants. I tried to focus on the clearing, scanning the tree line for movement, but the tension in the small space was becoming overwhelming. My heart pounded in my chest, and I wasn't sure if it was from the anticipation of spotting a deer or from the way Chloe shifted beside me. Her movements kept pulling my attention. "Do you always sit out here for hours like this?" she asked, breaking the silence. "Pretty much," I answered, keeping my eyes on the clearing. "Patience is a big part of hunting." She sighed, leaning back against the wall. "I guess I'm not very patient." I chuckled softly. "It's something you learn over time. Being out here teaches you how to slow down, how to be still." She glanced at me, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "You seem good at that. Being still, I mean. It's calming." I didn't know how to respond, so I just nodded, trying to push down the strange warmth her words stirred in me. She shifted again, this time pulling off her thermal top and leaving her in a snug tank top. It clung to her in a way that was hard to ignore. My throat went dry and I told myself to look away, but it was like trying to ignore the sun. "Much better," she said, exhaling as she leaned forward to stretch. "It's so stuffy in here." "Yeah, well, it'll cool down when the sun dips," I muttered, struggling to keep my focus on anything other than her. The silence stretched on, the air growing heavier with each passing moment. Chloe seemed oblivious. Or maybe not. She leaned back, letting her head rest against the wall and closing her eyes. The curve of her neck, the way her chest rose and fell with each breath, it was maddening. I clenched my jaw, gripping my rifle tighter as though that could steady me. "Do you ever get lonely out here?" she asked suddenly, her voice soft. I blinked, caught off guard. "Sometimes," I admitted, "but it's part of the experience. Being alone helps clear your head." She opened her eyes and turned to me, her gaze steady. "I think I'd go crazy being alone like this." "It's not for everyone," I said with a shrug. She was quiet for a moment, her eyes lingering on mine in a way that made my pulse quicken. Then she smiled, a mischievous glint in her eyes. "Well, at least you've got me for company this time." I let out a nervous laugh, unsure of where this was headed. Yeah, I guess I do. Her smile widened, and she leaned in slightly, her voice dropping to a near whisper. You don't mind, do you? My throat tightened and I shook my head. No, of course not. The space between us felt smaller than ever, the tension almost unbearable. She reached out, her fingers brushing against my arm. It was a light touch, but it sent a jolt through me. I turned to her, ready to say something, anything to break the moment, but the words caught in my throat. Thanks for bringing me out here, she said softly. I know it's not the same without your wife, but I'm glad to be here with you. I swallowed hard, nodding. It's no problem. I'm glad you're here too. The words felt heavier than they should have, laden with meaning I couldn't quite unpack. Chloe smiled again, her gaze lingering on mine before she turned back to the clearing. I tried to follow her lead, forcing my attention outward, but the line between us had already started to blur. The boundary I'd sworn to keep was slipping, and I wasn't sure I had the strength to stop it. The sun was sinking lower, casting golden hues across the treetops, but I could barely appreciate the beauty of the forest. Chloe's presence beside me had become almost magnetic, her every movement commanding my attention no matter how hard I tried to resist. We sat in silence, waiting for another chance at spotting a deer. But the real tension wasn't out in the woods. It was in the blind. She shifted beside me again, her bare arm brushing against mine. The contact was brief, almost innocent, but it sent a jolt through me that I couldn't ignore. I tightened my grip on the rifle, willing myself to focus on the task at hand. I'm sorry about missing that shot earlier, she said softly, breaking the silence. It happens, I replied, my voice more gruff than I intended. Everyone misses sometimes. She turned toward me, her expression earnest. Do you think I'll get another chance? I glanced at her, meeting her gaze for a moment longer than I should have. Maybe. Deer are unpredictable, but you have to be ready. She nodded, her lips curving into a faint smile. Thanks for being patient with me. I didn't think this trip would be so intense. The way she said intense made my heart skip a beat. I looked away, pretending to scan the clearing. It's all part of the experience. Silence fell again, but it wasn't the peaceful kind. It was charged, the air thick with unspoken words. Chloe shifted again, this time leaning in, moving forward to adjust her hair. It fell over her shoulder, brushing against my arm as she did. I could feel the heat of her skin and the faint scent of her shampoo in the air. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, that I was imagining things, but then she turned to me, her eyes searching mine. You've been quiet, she said, her voice low. What's on your mind? I hesitated, unsure how to answer. Just keeping an eye out for deer. Her smile widened, but there was something knowing in her gaze. You're a terrible liar, you know that? I chuckled nervously, shaking my head. I'm not lying. She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a near whisper. You're distracted. I can feel it. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. Chloe. She placed a hand on my arm, her touch light but deliberate. You don't have to say anything, she murmured. I feel it too. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be. But the look in her eyes, the warmth of her touch, it was impossible to deny. The boundary I'd been so determined to keep was crumbling, and part of me didn't want to stop it. I looked away, trying to gather my thoughts. This isn't right, I said, my voice barely audible. Maybe, she replied softly. But it doesn't feel wrong. Her words hung in the air, challenging everything I thought I knew about myself. I wanted to argue, to push her away, but the truth was, I didn't want to. For the first time in years, I felt something stir inside me, something I hadn't even realized was missing. Chloe, I began, but she silenced me with a gentle touch to my cheek. It's okay, she whispered. You don't have to say anything. And in that moment, as the last rays of sunlight painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, I made a choice. It wasn't a deliberate choice, but more of an instinctual surrender to the pull between us. I leaned in, closing the distance, and for the first time, I let go of the boundaries entirely. The moment our lips met, the world outside the blind vanished. The cold, the stillness of the woods, even the possibility of spotting a deer, all of it faded into the background. Her kiss started off tentative, almost as if she was waiting for me to pull away. But I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I found myself leaning into it, my hands moving to her arms, then her back, pulling her closer. For a brief moment, guilt surged within me like a sudden flood. My wife's face flashed through my mind, her trust, her unwavering belief in me. But then, Chloe sighed softly against my lips, her fingers brushing the back of my neck. In that instant, all rational thought dissolved, lost in the warmth of the moment. "This is wrong," I whispered, breaking the kiss but keeping her close. My forehead rested against hers, feeling her breath against my skin. "Maybe," she replied softly, her voice barely audible. "But does it feel wrong?" I didn't answer. How could I? She was right, it didn't feel wrong. It felt exhilarating, like a door I didn't even know existed had suddenly opened, flooding me with sensations I hadn't experienced in years. Part of me wanted to shut that door, to retreat to the safety of the life I had so carefully constructed. But another part of me, the part that hadn't felt alive in far too long, longed to see what lay beyond it. She pulled back slightly, her gaze searching mine. "If you want me to stop, tell me now," she said, her tone serious. "But if you don't—" Her voice trailed off, leaving the decision in my hands. I stared at her, my heart pounding so loudly I thought she could hear it. Her eyes held no malice, no manipulation, just an unspoken vulnerability that mirrored my own. It was a moment frozen in time, and I knew that whatever I chose, there would be no turning back. "I don't want you to stop," I heard myself say, my voice barely a whisper. Her lips curved into a soft smile and she leaned in again, her hands sliding up to cradle my face. This time the kiss wasn't tentative. It was deep, deliberate, and filled with a passion that sparked something inside me that I thought had long since gone cold. My hands found her waist, pulling her closer until there was no space left between us. We stayed like that for what seemed like hours, the outside world fading into a distant memory. Every touch, every whispered word, every stolen glance felt electric, charged with the knowledge that we were crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. But in that moment, I didn't care. For the first time in years, I felt seen, wanted, alive. Eventually, the cold began to creep into the blind, and she shivered against me. Reluctantly, I pulled away, my hands still resting on her hips. "We should head back," I said, my voice rough with emotion. She nodded but didn't move right away. Instead, she rested her head on my shoulder, wrapping her arms around me in a way that felt both comforting and possessive. "I don't want this to end," she murmured. "It doesn't have to," I replied, the words slipping out before I could stop them. As soon as I spoke, the weight of their meaning hit me. But I didn't regret them, not yet. We dressed in silence, the tension between us now palpable, as we made our way back to the cabin. I couldn't help but steal glances at her, the way her hair caught the fading sunlight, the curve of her smile when she caught me looking. Guilt lingered in the back of my mind, but it wasn't enough to overshadow the warmth that had settled in my chest. Back at the cabin, as the fire crackled and the shadows danced on the walls, she sat across from me, her gaze steady and unreadable. "This changes everything, doesn't it?" she asked softly. I nodded, unable to look away. "Yes, it does." The silence that followed was heavy, filled with unspoken fears and unacknowledged truths. But there was also something else, something unspoken but undeniable. A connection, a spark, a beginning. And in that moment I knew there was no turning back. The cabin was quiet except for the occasional crackle of the fire. Chloe sat across from me, her hands cupped around a mug of tea, her eyes focused on the flames. I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she kept stealing glances at me when she thought I wasn't looking. The weight of what we had done hung between us, thick and suffocating. I couldn't stop replaying the events of the morning, the heat of her touch, the way her lips had lingered on mine, the sheer electricity of it all. But now, as the reality of our choices began to sink in, the thrill was slowly replaced by something heavier: guilt, fear, doubt. "We need to talk," I finally said, breaking the silence. She looked up at me, her expression unreadable. "I know," she replied softly, setting her mug down on the table. "But I don't even know where to start." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees and running a hand through my hair. What happened out there? It can't happen again. Her lips tightened, and for a moment I thought she might argue, but then she nodded, her gaze dropping to her hands. I know, she said quietly. I knew it was wrong, even while it was happening. Her voice caught. But what? I asked gently, needing to hear her say it. She hesitated, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of her sleeve. But it felt real, she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. It felt like something I've been missing for so long, and I didn't want to let it go. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut, because I understood exactly what she meant. For years, I had buried myself in routines, responsibilities, and obligations, ignoring the growing emptiness inside me. And in those stolen moments with Chloe, that emptiness had been filled, temporarily perhaps, but filled nonetheless. It felt real to me too, I admitted, my voice low. But that doesn't make it right. We've both crossed a line, Chloe, a line we can't uncross. She looked up at me then, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. Do you regret it? She asked, her voice trembling. I hesitated. The question cut deeper than I expected. Did I regret it? Yes. I regretted the betrayal, the dishonesty, the pain this would undoubtedly cause if it ever came to light. But the moment itself, the connection I had felt with her, that was harder to answer. I regret the circumstances, I said carefully. I regret what this means for my marriage, for your relationship with my wife. But I can't sit here and tell you that I regret feeling alive for the first time in years. Her tears spilled over and she quickly wiped them away, pressing her lips into a thin line. I didn't mean to make things harder for you, she said. I thought this trip would just be about hunting, about learning something new. I didn't expect. She stopped herself, shaking her head. Neither did I said, my voice heavy. But now we're here, and we have to figure out how to move forward, because if this gets out... I trailed off, unable to finish the thought. The possibility of my wife finding out, the fallout that would follow, it was too much to bear. Chloe nodded, her expression somber. I'll keep it to myself, she promised. No one has to know. It stays that way, I said firmly. No slip-ups, no second chances. This ends here. She swallowed hard, nodding again. I understand. For a while, neither of us spoke. The fire crackled, the logs shifting slightly as the flames consumed them. I stared into the embers, wondering how something that had burned so brightly could fade so quickly, leaving only ashes in its wake. Eventually, Chloe stood, wrapping her arms. As she turned toward the stairs, she wrapped her arms around herself. I think I'll go to bed, she said softly, avoiding my gaze. I nodded, watching her as she climbed the spiral staircase. Her steps were light but purposeful. When she disappeared into the loft, I exhaled deeply, my breath shaky, and let my head fall into my hands. The weight of the day felt crushing, relentless. I knew there was nothing I could do to change what had occurred, but I also understood I couldn't allow it to define me. My marriage, my family, my integrity, all of it was now at stake. No matter how tempting it was to focus on what could have been, I couldn't let this mistake destroy everything I had worked so hard to build. As I stared at the fading embers in the fireplace, I silently promised myself that this would be the last time. The last time I allowed my desires to cloud my judgment. The last time I risked everything I cared about. But even as I made that promise, a small, deceitful part of me wondered if I truly had the strength to keep it. Reflecting on everything, one thing became painfully clear to me. Our actions, no matter how brief or fueled by emotion, always have consequences. In life, boundaries matter. Temptation may feel overpowering, but it's crucial to think beyond the immediate moment and consider the potential damage to those we love. Trust and loyalty are delicate, and once broken, they're rarely restored. If there's emptiness or unaddressed needs in a relationship, the right approach is to confront them honestly, not seek temporary fixes elsewhere. The cost of dishonesty is too high, and the peace that comes with a clear conscience is invaluable.